Hello, my name is Jackson Kane. I'm 35 years old. I never imagined I'd be the kind of person to talk about an encounter with Jesus, let alone say this publicly. But I feel like I have to. I need to tell you what happened. I died, I crossed over, and what I saw was something I never expected. I met Jesus, and he showed me something about white people that completely shocked me. It wasn't just a vision, it was a revelation. I'm still trying to make sense of it all, but deep down, I know it needs to be shared. On September 14th, I died at a faculty retreat, standing alone in front of an old whipping post on a former plantation. But let me back up, because if you're going to understand what happened, you need to know who I was. Or maybe who I thought I was. I'm a history professor at a well-known university in North Carolina. I specialize in race, politics, and American culture. I've given lectures on slavery, systemic oppression, and how the past still shapes our present. Students respect me. Colleagues admire my work. On paper, I looked like I had it all figured out. But that's just the surface. Behind the lectures and polished language, I was tired. Not just the kind of tired that coffee fixes. Something deeper. A tiredness that sat in my bones. Like I was running on fumes. Like I was pretending. My marriage ended 2 years ago. My ex-wife, Nina, tried for years to get me to open up, to really be present. But I stayed locked behind books and lectures. I gave the world my mind, but not my heart. I didn't know how. Or maybe I was too proud to admit I didn't. Our daughter, Leah, is 14 now. She lives with her mom in Charlotte. We talk sometimes, but not about real things. She texts me about school, or if she needs money. I tell her I'm proud of her, but deep down, I wonder if she believes it, or if it even means anything anymore. You ever have that feeling where you're in a room full of people, but you still feel completely alone? That was me. I could hold a room with my words, challenge people's ideas, win debates, but at night, I'd go home to silence. I'd eat takeout on the couch while the TV played reruns I wasn't even watching. I stopped going to church after the divorce. Not because I stopped believing, if I'm honest. I don't know if I ever really believed. Not in a personal way. Religion was something I studied, not something I felt. Maybe you know what it's like to feel hollow, even when everything looks good on the outside. I think everyone has moments where they ask, is this it? Is this all my life is? That's where I was when I went to the retreat. It was one of those professional development weekends hosted at a restored plantation that now serves as a conference center. I remember thinking how strange that was, holding a faculty retreat on land where people once suffered. But no one said anything. We just smiled, shook hands, checked our schedules. On the second day, we took a walking tour of the grounds, a symbolic reflection, they called it. We walked through the slave quarters, past rusted shackles behind glass. We paused near the old whipping post, where an inscription read, "May we never forget the cost of injustice." I stopped and stared at it. Something about that moment felt heavier than it should have. I remember standing there, thinking about all the lectures I'd given, all the times I'd spoken about history, like I was above it, like I wasn't part of the same human story. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like the teacher. I felt like the one being examined. Thunder rolled in the distance. Clouds were moving fast. The tour guide urged us to head back to the main building. People started walking, but I didn't. I just stood there, staring at that post. I thought about Leah, about how I never really talked to her about what it means to be biracial. About the times she asked questions I brushed off with academic answers. About how she once said, "Dad, you talk about justice, but sometimes you don't even see me." The wind picked up. The air turned sharp. Then came the flash. I didn't even see the lightning. Just a loud crack, then white. They told me later I was struck directly, that I collapsed before anyone reached me, that my heart stopped. But in that moment, I wasn't thinking. I wasn't even afraid. I was just gone. And yet somehow, that's when everything started to make sense. I'll tell you more about what happened after I died in the next part. But for now, I just want you to know, I wasn't always the kind of person who believed in spiritual things. I thought I had life figured out because I had the right degrees, the right vocabulary, the right opinions. But I didn't have peace. I didn't have love. I didn't even know how broken I was. We all carry wounds we don't talk about, fears we don't name. I carried mine behind intellect and progressivism. But none of that saved me from the emptiness I felt when I looked at my daughter and didn't know how to connect. None of it filled the ache I had when I realized I'd been preaching about justice while avoiding my own repentance. Maybe you've felt that too. Like your life is full, but your heart is still starving. Like you've built something impressive on the outside, but the inside feels like it's barely holding together. That's where I was, right before the storm came. And I didn't know it yet. But I was about to meet someone who saw all of it. All my pride, all my blindness, all my hidden shame, and loved me anyway. When the lightning struck, I didn't feel pain, not the way you might think. There was a blinding white flash, like the world had just snapped inside out. I remember hearing a loud crack, so loud it felt like it came from inside my chest. Then, silence. Total silence. At first I thought I had passed out, but then something strange happened. I realized I was still aware. Not like dreaming, not like sleeping. I could feel something, a softness, a floating sensation, like being underwater, but without any pressure, without needing to breathe. I opened my eyes. At least I think I did, because I could see. But it wasn't like seeing with my physical eyes. It was more like my whole self could see. I was above the ground, looking down, and there I was, lying next to the whipping post, arms twisted, body still. Someone was shouting. I saw a man from the tour group kneel beside me, shaking my shoulders. Another was yelling into a phone. That's when fear hit me. Oh my God, I'm dead. I panicked, not in a screaming movie-style way, but in the way your soul recoils when it realizes it's not in control anymore. I thought about Leah. I thought about how I never said the things I wanted to say, how I never told her I was sorry for being distant. Then I thought, am I going to hell? And the weirdest thing was, I didn't think that because of some fire and brimstone theology. I thought it because I knew I'd spent my life pretending I understood things I only studied, pretending to be a good man because I had good opinions. But I had never surrendered my heart, not to God, not to anyone. And yet, right when the fear started to spiral, something shifted. It was like light, not light you see with your eyes. Light you feel, warmth, comfort, like being held in a hug by someone who's known you forever. The fear melted, and I felt peace, real peace, like every heavy thought just slipped off my shoulders. Then everything around me changed. The earth below faded like smoke, and I was suddenly moving upward, forward, into something vast and glowing. It wasn't like flying. It was more like being carried, like gravity had flipped directions, and I was being drawn somewhere. The colors were like nothing I've ever seen. Not just bright, but alive. Golds, blues, soft purples that shimmered with meaning. I could hear music, but there were no instruments. It was like the colors were singing. And I understood the song, even though there were no words. It was singing about home. I started to cry, not because I was sad, but because I felt more me than I ever had in my whole life. No walls, no armor, just me. Then I saw him. At first, it was like trying to look at the sun. Too bright, too holy, but not in a scary way. It was the kind of brightness that made me want to fall on my face and weep, because I could feel how small and broken I was next to it, and yet somehow still loved. He stepped closer. He wasn't the Jesus from paintings, not the pale, blue-eyed man from Western church art. He was Middle Eastern, brown-skinned, strong, eyes like fire, but not angry, just pure, like they burned through lies, but wrapped truth in mercy. And he looked at me. I didn't hear a voice with ears, but I heard him in my soul. He said, "Jackson," just my name, but it shattered me, because the way he said it, it held everything. All my pain, all my pride, all the moments I felt unseen. It was like he had been there for every single one. I broke. I fell to my knees. Or maybe I just collapsed inside. I was crying, sobbing harder than I ever had. Not from shame, but from the way his love felt like a river, washing over every hidden part of me. I couldn't hide from him, and I didn't want to. I kept saying, "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I didn't see." And he just stood there, eyes full of compassion. He reached out his hand and touched me, not physically, but spiritually. And when he did, I felt something pour into me, like light but warm, like being healed from the inside. I felt safe, fully safe. You know that moment when someone really sees you, not just the surface, but all of you, and they still love you? That's what it felt like. No lecture, no rebuke, just presence, just truth and love, standing in front of me. I don't know how long I stayed there. Time didn't feel real in that place. Everything felt whole. And somehow, in his silence, he was showing me things. Memories, regrets, people I had hurt by being distant, even when I thought I was being right. It all flashed across my heart like a mirror I couldn't turn away from. And still, he didn't leave. I could feel that part 3 was coming, that he was going to speak to me directly, show me things I never wanted to see but needed to. But before all that, he let me rest. He let me be his. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to be good. I wasn't trying to be impressive. I was just loved, completely. And that changed everything. I don't know how long I stayed there, in front of him. Time didn't feel real. It was just Jesus and me. And somehow, that was enough. His presence held everything. Truth, love, mercy. It wasn't like he was switching between being gentle and being holy. He was both, all at once. Stronger than anything I'd ever known, but tender too. I stayed there on my knees, my chest heaving as the sobs slowed. And still, he stood before me, watching me with eyes that knew every version of me, every proud lecture, every quiet judgment, every missed opportunity to love, and never looked away. Finally, I heard him speak again. "You've carried the weight of truth, Jackson," he said, "but you never let it touch your own heart." I looked up at him, my voice shaky. I thought I was helping people, teaching them to think better, to see injustice. He nodded slowly. "You taught truth like it was a sword, but you never let it be a mirror." That hit me hard, because it was true. I had spent years calling out systems, calling out ignorance, calling out history. But I had never called out me. I had hidden behind the comfort of being the teacher, the one with the facts, the one who always had the right words. But facts aren't the same as love, and truth without love is just another weapon. Jesus stepped closer. I felt his presence press into my soul like sunlight through cold skin. "You judged others for not seeing," he said gently, "but you refused to open your own eyes." I started to cry again, quiet this time, the kind of crying that comes from years of things unsaid. "Like Leah?" I whispered. His eyes softened. "Yes, your daughter cried out for your heart, but you gave her your mind. She needed a father. You gave her a professor." I covered my face. I didn't know how to love her right. I didn't know how to see her. "You were afraid," he said, kneeling in front of me now. "Afraid to fail, afraid to feel. But Jackson, you are not alone in this." He reached out, and this time I felt it. His touch, warm and steady, like it was knitting something back together inside me that had been broken since childhood. And then he showed me something, not a vision, like a movie screen, but more like a truth opening up inside my chest. I saw generations, white fathers, good men, honest men, but emotionally distant, afraid of softness, afraid of not being enough. So they passed down strength without tenderness, truth without love, righteousness without relationship. And I saw how that passed down blindness, how churches spoke about sin but stayed silent about slavery, how people taught scripture but skipped past suffering, how entire communities learned to compartmentalize, to love God with their words but protect comfort with their silence. And I saw how I had done the same. Jesus looked into me and said, "This blindness is not just history. It is a spirit, and it still walks among you." I trembled. "So what do I do with that?" "You speak," he said, "but not like before. You speak from the heart, from humility, from love." He stood again, full of quiet authority. "There are children crying out, Jackson, children of every color, children left behind by systems, by pride, by people too afraid to look honestly at their pain. And many of my people, especially those who look like you, refuse to hear them." I swallowed hard. "Why me?" "Because you stood in front of truth every day," he said, "but you never let it pierce you. Now it has." And in that moment, something inside me shattered, and something new began. I felt the hard parts of my heart begin to soften. I felt years of quiet superiority melt away. I felt, for the first time, what it meant to repent. Not just say sorry, but turn around. I was still on my knees, but I didn't feel ashamed anymore. I felt like a son. "Jesus," I said through tears, "I don't want to leave this place." He smiled, so full of love it made me ache. "I know, but your story isn't done." I shook my head. "How can I go back after this? The world feels so far away from this peace." "That's why I'm sending you," he said, "to be a voice, not of guilt, but of grace, not of fear, but of truth spoken in love." He stepped closer again, and the light around him seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. "Tell them I see them," he said. "Tell my children, especially the ones who think they have nothing to repent for, that I am calling them deeper, not to shame them, but to free them, to heal what they didn't know was broken." I nodded slowly, my heart pounding. "And Leah?" I asked. His smile grew gentler. "Start with her. Listen, learn. Love her not through ideas, but through presence. She doesn't need a hero. She needs her dad." I closed my eyes, let his words sink in. Everything inside me wanted to stay, to never leave that place, to be held in that light forever. But I could feel it, something pulling me, a gentle tug, like a tide pulling me back to shore. "Will I remember all of this?" I asked. "You'll remember what matters," he said, "and the rest will rise as you walk." And then he placed his hand over my heart, and I felt fire and peace all at once. "Go," he whispered. "I am with you." The light began to fade. The music, the warmth, the colors, all started to dissolve like morning mist. And with one last look into his eyes, I said the only thing I could. "Thank you." Coming back felt like being pulled through water and waking up gasping for air. My body was heavy. My chest burned. My ears rang. I could hear voices, someone shouting, a woman crying, the screech of sirens. But none of it made sense at first. I was alive. But I didn't feel joy right away. The first thing I felt was grief, because I had just left the safest place I had ever known. I had just looked into the eyes of Jesus, into the purest love I could ever imagine. And now I was back in a broken world, back in skin that ached, back in a life filled with questions. I remember thinking, how do I go on living after that? But then I remembered his voice, the weight of his words in my soul. Your story isn't done. Start with her. Go. I am with you. And somehow, that was enough to keep breathing. I was in the hospital for 3 days. They told me I had been clinically dead for over 4 minutes. The lightning had stopped my heart. The fact that I survived, let alone without brain damage, was something they couldn't explain. But I could. Because I met the one who made me, and he sent me back with purpose. The first time I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. Not physically. I looked the same. But something in my eyes had changed. The hardness was gone. The fear, the pride. I saw a man who had come to the end of himself and been remade. Leah came to see me the second night. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed like she was holding herself together. Her eyes were red. She'd been crying. "Hey," I said softly. She didn't move for a second, just looked at me like she was trying to decide if I was real. Then she walked in and sat beside the bed. She didn't say anything, just looked at me with this deep, quiet pain I'd never taken the time to notice before. "I saw you," I whispered. "When I was gone, I saw you. And I'm so sorry, baby. I wasn't the father you needed. I was so busy trying to be right. I never took time to just be with you." Her lip trembled. She looked down. "I didn't know how to talk to you anymore," she said. "It always felt like I had to prove something." I reached for her hand. "You don't. Not anymore. Not ever again." She leaned into me, and I held her. Really held her. And in that moment, I realized this. This was the first real conversation we'd ever had. No theories, no lectures, just love. When I was released, everything looked different. The sky, the trees, even people on the street. It was like I could see deeper than before. The tired man at the bus stop wasn't just a stranger. He was someone's son. The cashier with a fake smile wasn't just doing her job. She was carrying a weight I might never know. I stopped rushing. I stopped judging. I started noticing. I took a leave from the university. The old me would have never done that. I had conferences lined up, 2 book proposals, and a teaching load that always kept me too busy. But none of that mattered anymore. I told my department head, "I need time to be a father first, a man of presence, not just performance." He blinked. "Are you okay?" I smiled. "For the first time in my life?" "Yeah." I started spending real time with Leah. Not just dinner check-ins or last-minute weekend visits. I mean, time. We walked in parks. We sat in silence. We cooked messy dinners and burned half of them. But we laughed. We laughed. I apologized for every year I had been absent, even when I was physically there. She didn't forgive me all at once, but she started to soften. Little by little, our hearts found each other. I also began writing again, but not the academic kind. I started sharing my story. I told churches, classrooms, even a podcast hosted by one of my former students. At first, I was afraid. Afraid people would think I'd gone crazy, that I'd lost my edge. But I didn't care anymore. Because this wasn't about being impressive. It was about being obedient. And I saw something happen. Something I didn't expect. People started to weep. Not because I had clever words, but because something deep in them recognized the truth. That many of us have been more concerned with being right than being loving. That we've built platforms when we were supposed to build bridges. That we've used God's name without carrying His heart. I started talking to fellow white Christians, not from a place of accusation, but of invitation. I told them about what Jesus showed me, the spiritual blindness passed down through comfort, the voices we don't hear, the suffering we don't see. And I said this: Jesus isn't angry at you. He's calling you. He's calling us to go deeper, to get honest, to love better. Some people listened, some didn't, but I kept speaking. Because it wasn't about results, it was about faithfulness. My priorities shifted completely. Family over work. I turned down a major speaking contract because it would have taken me away from Leah's school year. Health over hustle. I started walking every morning and ended every day in prayer instead of grading papers until midnight. People over pride. I reached out to Nina and asked forgiveness, not to fix the past, but to make peace. We're not back together, but we're learning how to co-parent with grace. Every day, I try to live like eternity is real, like heaven is closer than we think. Because I remember the way Jesus said my name. I remember His eyes, like fire and mercy in the same breath. And I never want to forget that moment he looked at me, saw all my mess, and still loved me. Maybe you're reading this and wondering if God could really love someone like you. Someone who's failed, who's proud, who's tired. Maybe you've stayed busy your whole life, so you don't have to feel the ache inside. I get it. I lived there for years. But let me tell you something Jesus told me. I am with you. Not just when you're perfect. Not when you've earned it. But now. Today. In your weakness. In your searching. You don't have to have all the answers. You just need to let the walls come down. There is a love waiting for you that will undo everything you thought you knew and rebuild you from the inside out. My name is Jackson Kane. I'm 35 years old. I died. I met Jesus. And I came back changed. And if he could love someone like me, he can love someone like you too.